I spent most of my life staying away from people. Some of that came from the service. Some of it came after. A failed marriage will teach you things about yourself you don't always want to learn, and I learned mine well enough to know I was better off alone. So I went where being alone made sense. Northern timber country. Off-grid. 40 acres bordered by state land on two sides and nothing but dead logging roads on the others. The nearest neighbor sat just under 9 miles out, and he kept to himself as much as I did. I trapped. That was the work. Marten, fox, sometimes coyote when the season allowed, enough to keep money coming in. Enough to keep me outside most days, which is where I preferred to be. The cabin wasn't much. Single room, wood stove, a table, a bunk, and a storage lean-to I'd patched together over the years. Everything had a place. Everything had a purpose. Predictable. That matters more than people realize. I built the fence about 5 years after I moved in. Not a decorative thing. 8-foot posts, reinforced wire, buried a foot into the ground all the way around the core perimeter, about 60 yards out from the cabin in every direction. Overkill, most would say. They'd be right. But I'd seen what desperation looks like in the woods. Winter strips things down to need, and need makes animals do things they wouldn't otherwise consider. The fence wasn't to keep everything out, just to slow it down long enough for me to decide what to do about it. That's the difference. Control isn't about stopping something. It's about buying time. For years, that fence did exactly what it was supposed to. Tracks would come up to it. Deer, mostly. Sometimes a coyote pacing the line, testing for gaps. Once in a while, a black bear in the late season, pushing its luck before settling back into the trees. Normal, explainable. Something you could measure, track, respond to. Then, late November, about 3 weeks into a cold snap that had frozen the ground harder than I'd seen in years, I found the first set of tracks. I was making my morning round along the inside perimeter. Standard check. Snow had fallen light overnight, just enough to take a clean impression without filling in detail. That's ideal. You can read a lot from a clean track. Weight, direction, gait, whether the animal's injured, whether it's hunting or just passing through. These tracks, they didn't fit. At first glance, you'd say wolf. Big one. Front paws wide, rear following clean, but the stride was off. Too long, too spaced. And the depth of the impressions didn't match the spread. Heavier than it should have been. I crouched down, brushing the edge of one print with my glove, clearing loose powder to see the shape better. That's when it stopped being something I could explain away. There were impressions ahead of it. Not paw prints, footprints, long, narrow, 5 digits, pressed deep at the front, lighter at the heel. I sat back on my heels and just looked at them for a while. "You're seeing it wrong," I said out loud. "Cold does that. Plays tricks with your eyes. Light hits the snow at angles that distort depth and shape. I'd seen it before, but not like this." I followed the tracks along the inside of the fence line. They ran parallel for about 20 yards, then they stopped. Not faded, not turned, stopped. Like whatever made them had stepped out of the world entirely. No return trail, no diversion into the trees, just an end. That should have been enough. Enough to tell me something wasn't right. Enough to make me double-check the fence, maybe reinforce a section, keep the rifle closer that night. Instead, I did what people always do when something doesn't fit. I rationalized. "Took a jump," I muttered, standing up. "Hit a rock, changed direction." Didn't matter that there were no rocks nearby. Didn't matter that the snow was too clean for that kind of break. I gave myself an answer, and I moved on. That was my first mistake. Not seeing it, explaining it. The next night, the cameras caught it. I'd set those up the previous year after losing a line of traps to something that had learned how to trip them without getting caught. Motion triggered, infrared, nothing fancy. Just enough to monitor the perimeter when I wasn't out there. I checked them every morning with coffee. Routine, control. That morning, I sat down, ran through the first few feeds, deer, wind. One of the cameras caught a fox dragging something small across the frame. Normal. Then I got to the north side, the one that faced the thickest part of the trees. The timestamp read 3:12 a.m. The frame stayed still for a few seconds. Then something moved into view. Low at first, on all fours. Big. Bigger than any wolf I'd ever seen. It came up to the fence and stopped. The infrared washed it out in shades of white and gray, but the shape was clear enough. Long limbs, shoulders too pronounced. Head too high even when it was down. I leaned closer to the screen. "All right," I said quietly. "Let's see you turn." That's what animals do. They pace, they test, they move along the barrier looking for a weak point. This one didn't. It lifted its head. And then it stood up. Not a rear, not a brief lift. It rose, fully, balanced. 2 legs. I felt my stomach drop in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. "No," I said, almost under my breath. The camera didn't shake. There was no distortion. It just stood there, tall enough that its head sat just below the top wire. Arms, front limbs, whatever you want to call them, hung down at its sides longer than they should have. And it looked straight into the camera, not through it, at it. I sat back in my chair slowly. "All right," I said again, louder this time. "So we're doing this. There's a moment when something crosses from unknown into unacceptable. When your brain stops trying to categorize it and starts preparing for it. That was mine. I replayed the clip 3 times, same result every time. It stood there for maybe 5 seconds. Then it dropped back down to all fours and moved out of frame. No panic, no urgency, just gone. I checked the rest of the footage. Nothing, no second pass, no circling. Just that one appearance. I finished my coffee cold, didn't taste it. Then I got up, grabbed my rifle, and went out to the fence. The tracks were there, clear, matching what I'd seen the day before. Only this time, they went right up to the wire and stopped. No digging, no attempt to push through, just a presence. I stood there, looking at those prints, then at the trees beyond. "You don't belong out here," I said. It wasn't a challenge, it was a statement, one I needed to believe. I walked the rest of the perimeter, checked every post, every joint, every stretch of wire. Nothing disturbed, no entry point, no sign that anything had crossed over. That mattered. That was the line. Inside was mine. Outside wasn't. I went back to the cabin and spent the rest of the day doing things that made sense. Chopping wood, resetting traps, cleaning gear. Work that kept my hands moving and my mind from circling back to that footage. By the time night came, I'd built a version of the situation I could live with. Big animal. Unusual movement. Camera distortion making it look worse than it was. Not because it made sense, because it let me sleep. That didn't last. 3:08 a.m. I was awake before the alarm, didn't know why. Just that feeling you get when something's off and your body knows it before your mind catches up. I sat up, listened. Nothing, no wind, no animals, just that heavy kind of quiet you only get deep in the woods when everything else decides not to move. Then I heard it. From the direction of the fence, a sound that didn't fit anything I'd cataloged in 30 years out there. High, thin, not quite a whine, not quite a cry, somewhere in between. I swung my legs off the bed, grabbed the rifle, and moved to the window without turning on the light. Slow, careful, the kind of movement that doesn't announce itself. I eased up to the edge of the frame and looked out. At first, I saw nothing. Then the shape resolved. At the fence. Same spot, only this time there were two of them. I didn't move right away. That's the part people expect you to lie about. They think you either panic or act, fight or run. Clean, simple reactions that make sense when you tell the story later. Truth is, I just stood there, watching. Two shapes at the fence, one larger, one smaller, both still enough that they almost blended into the dark if you didn't know where to look. The larger one was positioned where the first had stood the night before. Same spot, same angle, like it had memory of the place. The smaller one stayed low, a few feet off to the side, moving in short, quick shifts that didn't follow a straight pattern. It would edge forward, pause, pull back, circle just enough to change its angle. Curious, restless. The difference between them was clear even at a distance. I eased the window open just a fraction. Cold air slipped in, carrying scent with it. Damp earth, old leaves, something faintly metallic underneath that I couldn't place at first. Blood. Old, not fresh. That registered and then sat there, waiting for me to decide what to do with it. The larger one lifted its head. Not toward the fence, toward the cabin, toward me. I froze. There's a particular kind of stillness you learn out there. Not just holding your body in place, but shutting down every unnecessary movement. Breath shallow, weight balanced so the floor doesn't creak. I did all of that without thinking. It didn't matter. It had already seen me. I could tell in the way its posture shifted, not aggressive, not defensive, aware. The smaller one made that sound again. Higher this time, shorter. It moved closer to the fence, nose low, following something along the base of the wire. The larger one stayed upright, watching. I felt that same drop in my gut as the night before, only this time it didn't come with disbelief. It came with confirmation. This was real. I closed the window slowly, keeping my eyes on them until the frame cut off the view. Then I stepped back into the room. "All right," I said under my breath. "So there's two." Saying it out loud made it worse. Not because of the number, because of what it implied. Pairs mean structure. Structure means pattern. Pattern means you can predict it. Or it can predict you. I didn't go back to bed. I sat at the table, rifle laid across it, and waited for the light to come. When it did, I went out. Tracks told the story better than anything I'd seen through the glass. Two sets. The larger one's prints were the same as before, deep, spaced, too far apart. Front and rear alternating between paw and something else I still didn't want to name. The smaller ones were lighter, shorter stride, same mixed pattern. They'd come up to the fence, moved along it for about 10 yards, stopped. No digging, no attempt to get under, just movement parallel to the barrier. Then they'd turned back. Both sets, together. I followed the tracks until they broke into the trees. This time, they didn't vanish. They continued, straight, purposeful, deeper into the forest. That should have settled something. Given me direction. Instead, it did the opposite. Because now there was no break in the pattern, no unexplained gap I could ignore. Just a clean path in and a clean path out. Deliberate. I stood there at the edge of the tree line, looking in. "You're not passing through," I said quietly. Passing through leaves randomness, angles, hesitation. This didn't, this came here, for the fence, for the boundary. I turned back toward the cabin. That's when I saw it. At the base of the fence, just off to the side of where the larger one had stood. The ground was disturbed. Not dug out, not broken, tested. The top layer of frozen soil had been scraped, pushed aside just enough to expose the harder layer beneath. I crouched down, running my glove over it. Not claws, not exactly. There were marks, but they were spaced wrong, too even, too deliberate, like fingers. I pulled my hand back. "That's not good," I said. "Plain. No dressing it up." I spent the rest of the morning reinforcing that section. Drove in another length of scrap metal along the base, packed the dirt tighter, checked the tension on the wire, work. Something I could control. But even while I was doing it, I knew what I was really doing. Reacting, not leading. That shift matters. By midday, I'd run through every reasonable explanation again. Escaped animals. Some kind of deformity. People playing a joke that didn't make sense this far out. Every option fell apart under its own weight. Not because it was impossible, because it didn't fit the details. So I stopped trying to name it. That was the second mistake. When you stop naming something, you stop defining its limits. And without limits, you start letting it set them. That afternoon, I checked the cameras again. Went back through the footage from the night before. The second one had been caught too. Not as clearly. It stayed lower, moved faster, slipping in and out of the frame. But the pattern matched what I'd seen. One still, one moving, one watching, one testing. I leaned back in the chair, rubbing a hand over my face. "All right," I said. "So what do you want?" It wasn't a question I expected answered. But it was the right one. Animals want things. Food, territory, safety. Those are the drivers. If I could figure out which one applied here, I could respond. That's how you stay alive out there. You understand what something needs, and you either give it distance or deny it access. Simple, clean. Except this didn't feel simple. They hadn't tried to get in, hadn't pushed the fence, hadn't even circled it fully. They came to one spot, stayed, watched, then left. That's not hunger, that's not territory, that's something else. I didn't like that answer. So I went back to the basics. Prepared. That night, I didn't wait to be woken up. I was already up before the hour turned. Lights off, fire low, rifle in my hands. Positioned at the window again, same as before. 3:04 a.m. Nothing, 3:09. A flicker of movement near the fence. They came in quieter this time. If I hadn't been watching the exact spot, I might have missed the approach. The smaller one first, low, quick, stopping just short of the wire. The larger one followed. Upright again by the time it reached the same place it had chosen twice before. Consistency, that matters. It tells you this isn't random. I watched them for a full minute without moving. The smaller one paced along the base of the fence, nose close to the ground, tracing the line I'd reinforced earlier. It paused at the spot where I'd worked. Sniffed, then looked up. Not at the fence. At the cabin. At me. I felt something shift in my chest. Not fear, recognition. That it knew, not what I was, but that I had changed something. The larger one stayed still. Head angled slightly, eyes fixed in my direction. I didn't try to hide this time, didn't pull back from the window. If it could see me before, it could see me now. No point pretending otherwise. "Go on," I said quietly. "Try it." The words sounded strange even as I said them, like I was testing something as much as they were. The smaller one moved closer, pressed in toward the base of the fence. Started to dig, not frantic, measured. Short bursts of movement, then a pause, then another. The soil held. The reinforcement did its job. After a few seconds, it stopped, stepped back, looked at the larger one, waiting. That told me more than anything else so far. It wasn't acting alone. It was checking. The larger one didn't move right away, just watched. Then, slowly, it lowered itself to all fours. Stepped forward. placed one of those long hands, because that's what it was, no matter how much I resisted the word, against the wire. Not pushing, feeling, testing the tension. I tightened my grip on the rifle. "Don't," I said, louder now. The word cut through the quiet sharper than I expected. The larger one froze. Hand still on the wire. Head turning just slightly. Toward the sound, toward me. And then it stopped. Pulled its hand back, stepped away from the fence. The smaller one followed immediately, backing off without question. Both of them moved a few steps into the clearing, and stood there, facing the cabin, facing me. No aggression, no retreat, just holding position. I felt my pulse pick up, not from fear, but from the realization settling in. It heard me. Not the noise, the intent, and it responded. That's when the line shifted for the first time. Not physically. Something else. Something I didn't have a word for yet. And that should have been enough to tell me to end it right there. Reinforce the fence. Stay inside. Let whatever this was pass on its own. Instead, I leaned a little closer to the glass and said, "Yeah, that's right." Like I'd just proven something. Like I was still the one in control. I didn't sleep after that. Not because I was afraid to, because my head wouldn't shut off. You spend enough years alone, your thoughts get loud, not in a way that feels like panic, more like a steady pressure that keeps circling the same point until you either solve it or give up. I wasn't giving it up. What mattered wasn't what they were. What mattered was what they were doing. And more importantly, what they weren't doing. They hadn't forced the fence, hadn't shown aggression, hadn't even tried to close the distance once I spoke. That last part sat heavier than anything else. I kept replaying that moment in my head. The way the larger one, Elias, though I hadn't named him yet, stopped when I told it to. Not flinched, not startled, stopped. That's not instinct, that's response, there's a difference. By morning, I had a working model, not a comfortable one, but one I could operate inside. "They're testing," I said, pouring coffee I didn't need. "Seeing what holds. Seeing what reacts." That made sense. It gave me a role again. Observer, responder, not just someone waiting for the next thing to happen. I went out to the fence early. Tracks confirmed what I'd seen, digging attempts, short, controlled. Stopped when resistance held, no escalation, no sign they'd come back after I spoke. They left clean, together. I followed the trail into the trees again, not as far this time, just enough to confirm direction, northwest, same as before. Consistency builds pattern. Pattern gives you leverage. That's what I told myself. I spent the rest of the day adjusting, not reinforcing, not yet. I wanted to see what they'd do if nothing changed. That's important. You don't alter variables until you understand the baseline. That's how you end up reacting blind. So I left it as it was. Worked my traps, checked lines, did everything I normally would. Except, I kept circling back in my head to one question. What do they want? Not hunger, not territory, then what? That night, I changed one thing. Just one. I moved my position. Instead of the window, I stood by the door, inside, hand on the latch, rifle leaning against the wall beside me. Not in my hands, close, but not immediate, 3:06 a.m. They came. Same pattern. Smaller one first, low, quick. The larger one followed, upright by the time it reached the fence. Same spot, always the same spot. That consistency had started to feel like an intention. I waited, let them settle into their positions. The smaller one moved along the base of the fence again, testing, checking, repeating the same behavior as the night before. The larger one stood still, watching. Not the fence, me. I could feel it even without the window between us. That line of attention, direct, unbroken. I exhaled slowly and opened the door, just enough. A crack. Cold air rushed in, carrying that same faint metallic scent. Stronger now. I stepped into the doorway, half in, half out. Line intact, but thinner. "All right," I said, voice low, steady. "Let's see what you do." The smaller one froze. Immediate, mid-step. Head snapping toward the sound. The larger one didn't move right away. Then, slowly, it lowered itself to all fours and stepped forward, closing the distance to the fence. Closer than before. I felt my body tense even as I told myself to hold position. It reached the wire, stopped, looked at me, then placed that same long hand against the fence again. Not testing this time, not probing, just there. Contact. I didn't raise the rifle, didn't step back. "If you push through," I said, keeping my voice level, "this changes." That was a line, clear, defined, always, always. The larger one held there for a second, then pulled its hand back. Stepped away, same as before. The smaller one followed instantly, backing off, circling once before settling a few feet behind it. They both stood there, facing me. No movement, no sound. Just that quiet pressure building in the space between us. I realized then that I'd been holding my breath. I let it out slowly. "Good," I said. "We understand each other." That was the first lie I told myself that mattered, because understanding goes both ways, and I hadn't earned that, not yet. The smaller one shifted again, stepping forward just a little, testing the distance without approaching the fence directly. Curiosity. It was stronger in this one, less controlled, more likely to make a mistake. The larger one didn't correct it, didn't stop it, just watched. That told me something too. It wasn't managing every movement, just the important ones. The smaller one let out that sound again. Short, sharp, directed, at me. I felt it more than I heard it. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I hear you." I don't know why I said that. It didn't mean anything, but it felt like part of the exchange. The larger one's head tilted slightly. Same motion as before, but slower, more deliberate. It stepped forward again, not to the fence, just into the clearing, reducing the distance. I felt my grip tighten on the doorframe. "If you come any closer," I said, a little firmer now, "this ends." Another line, clear, defined. The larger one stopped, right there, at that invisible boundary, held it, didn't push, didn't retreat, just stayed. The smaller one mirrored the movement, stopping a step behind. I counted the distance without thinking. 15 feet, maybe a little more, close enough to matter, far enough to react. We stayed like that for longer than I can measure now. Time stretches in moments like that, then compresses when you try to remember it. Eventually, the larger one lowered its head. Not in submission, not in aggression, just a shift. Then it turned, dropped to all fours, and moved back toward the tree line. The smaller one followed immediately. No hesitation, no lingering. Gone. I closed the door, locked it. Stood there for a long time with my hand still on the latch. "That's a pattern," I said finally. And it was. Approach, test, response, withdrawal, clean, repeatable, something I could work with. That was the thought that stuck. Not the fact that I was standing in a doorway talking to something that shouldn't exist. Not the fact that it responded. Just that it followed a pattern. That was enough for me. More than enough. By morning, I'd already decided what the next step would be. Not because it was safe, not because it was smart, but because I wanted to know what would happen if I changed the pattern. That's the moment things start moving in a direction you can't pull back from. Not when something shows up, when you decide to engage with it. I didn't make the change that night. That's the part I'll give myself credit for, even if it doesn't amount to much in the end. I sat with it first. Let the idea settle. turned it over enough times to see where it might break. Because once you change a pattern like that, you don't get to pretend you're just observing anymore. You're part of it. Morning came slow. Heavy clouds, low light, the kind that flattens everything out so distance feels shorter than it is. I went out to the fence again, same as the last 2 days. Same tracks, same approach line, same stopping point. No digging this time, that stood out. The soil I'd reinforced held its shape. No fresh disturbance. No attempt to test it again. They'd tried, found resistance, adjusted. That's intelligence. Simple as that. I crouched there for a while, studying the ground like it was going to give me something new if I stared long enough. It didn't. "You're not just pushing," I said quietly. "You're deciding." That's when it stopped being about keeping something out. It became about figuring out what would make it come closer. I stood up, brushed the dirt off my gloves, and walked back toward the cabin. Halfway there, I stopped. Turned. Looked back at the fence. That spot. Always that same spot. Consistency like that isn't random, it's chosen. I went inside and sat at the table, didn't touch the rifle, didn't check the cameras, just sat there thinking. If it wasn't hunger, if it wasn't territory, then the only thing left was interaction. Testing response. Same way I was. That thought should have shut it down. Should have told me to cut it off, reinforce everything, stay inside, wait it out. Instead, it did the opposite. It gave me a way in. "All right," I said, pushing back from the table. "We'll test it." I went to the storage lean-to and pulled out a piece of meat. Venison. Nothing special. Something I could afford to lose. I stood there with it in my hand for a second longer than I needed to. This was the point. Clear. Defined. Once I did this, the pattern wouldn't be clean anymore. It wouldn't be approach and retreat. It would be exchange. I stepped outside, walked to the fence. Same spot. Of course. I crouched down and set the meat just inside the perimeter, not pressed against the wire, not hidden, visible, deliberate. "You come this far every night," I said, standing up. "Let's see what you do with that." The words felt different this time. Not reactive. Initiating. I walked back to the cabin without looking over my shoulder. That was another choice. Didn't want to see if something was already watching. Didn't want to change my pace. Inside, I didn't go to the window. Didn't take up position. I sat at the table and waited. No rifle in my hands, just there, within reach. Time stretched. Longer than it should have. Every sound outside pulled at my attention. Wind brushing through the trees. Something small moving through the undergrowth. Normal sounds. But they all felt sharper now. Like they were leading to something. 3:02 a.m., earlier than before. That registered. Pattern tightening. I stood and moved to the window. Slow. Controlled. Same as the nights before. They were already there, the smaller one first, right at the fence. Closer than it had ever been. Its head snapped toward the meat immediately. No hesitation, no circling, straight to it. That told me more than I wanted to admit. It hadn't needed to search, it had known. The larger one stepped into view a second later, upright again, same position, same angle, watching, not the meat, me. I felt that line of attention lock in even through the glass. "You see it," I said quietly. "Good." The smaller one edged closer, nose low, movements quick and tight. It got within a foot of the meat. Stopped, looked up, at the larger one, waiting. That dynamic again, clear as anything. The larger one didn't move right away, just held that position. Then, slowly, it lowered itself to all fours. Stepped forward, closing the distance to the fence, to the offering, to the line I'd just drawn. I felt my body tense without thinking. "If you come through that wire," I said, voice low but firm, "this ends. Same rule, same line. Always." The larger one stopped at the fence, reached out. Not to the wire this time, to the ground, to the meat. Its hand hovered over it for a second, then it picked it up, simple, clean, no rush, no snatch, just took it. The smaller one shifted immediately, stepping closer, body tightening like it expected conflict. The larger one turned slightly, placing itself between the smaller one and the fence, between the smaller one and me. Then it tore a piece free and dropped it. The smaller one took it, backed off, ate, fast, efficient. The larger one ate slower, deliberate, measured. I stood there watching, feeling something settle in my chest that I didn't question the way I should have. Not relief, not exactly, control. That's what it felt like. Like I'd just proven something. Like I'd set a rule and it had followed it. That's how it starts. You take one response and build a whole structure around it. The larger one lifted its head while it was still chewing, looked at me, held it, long enough that the act of eating stopped being the focus. This was that connection. I didn't move, didn't step back. "Yeah," I said under my breath. "That's how this works." Another lie, a better one, because it had evidence behind it, but still a lie. They finished the meat quickly. No scraps left behind, no sign of excess. They hadn't come for food, they'd taken it because it was there. That distinction matters. The larger one dropped the last piece, stepped back from the fence. The smaller one followed immediately. Both of them moved a few feet into the clearing, same as the night before, same distance, same spacing, facing me, pattern holding. I felt my pulse steady, that false sense of understanding settling in deeper. "Tomorrow," I said quietly, almost without thinking, "we'll see what changes." The words hung there, not meant for them, meant for me. The larger one tilted its head slightly, that same motion, then turned, dropped to all fours, and moved toward the tree line. The smaller one followed, gone. I stayed at the window longer than I needed to, long enough for the clearing to empty out and the silence to settle back in, long enough for the weight of what I'd just done to start pressing in. I'd changed the pattern, and it had worked. That's what I told myself. Not that I'd invited something closer. Not that I'd opened a line of interaction I couldn't control. Just that it had worked. By morning, the evidence was gone. No meat, no scraps, just tracks, clear, detailed. Both sets had come in. Stopped, fed, left, clean, no hesitation, no deviation. I crouched there again, studying the impressions. "You're learning," I said. Then I corrected myself. "We're learning." That word slipped out without permission. "We." That was the moment the line blurred in a way I didn't fully register. Not because I didn't see it, because I didn't stop it. I stood up and looked out toward the trees. "You come back tonight," I said quietly. "We'll see how far this goes." That wasn't a plan, it was a commitment. And once you make one of those out there, something always answers. I didn't put food out the next night. That was deliberate. You don't test a response by repeating the same condition. You remove it and see what changes. That's the kind of thinking that kept me alive for a long time. It's also the kind that pushed this further than it should have gone. I kept everything else the same time, same position at the window, same low light inside the cabin. Rifle within reach, but not in my hands. 3:01 a.m., earlier again. That pattern tightening hadn't slowed. They came in fast. Not reckless, just efficient. The smaller one reached the fence first, went straight to the spot where the meat had been the night before. Stopped, nose low, tracing the ground, searching. The larger one followed, upright by the time it reached the clearing. Same stance, same angle. But something was different. Subtle. Easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. It didn't look at me right away. It looked at the ground, at the empty space where the food had been. Then it lifted its head and looked at me. I felt that shift immediately. Expectation, that's what it was, not hunger, not confusion, a break in pattern. I didn't move, didn't speak, let it sit. The smaller one moved faster now, circling the base of the fence, widening its search, movements sharper than before. That high, thin sound came again, longer this time, drawn out, not quite a call, not quite frustration, something in between. Not tonight, I said quietly. The words left my mouth before I'd decided to say them. The larger one reacted, small, but clear, head tilt, slight shift in posture, acknowledgement. The smaller one froze for a second, then snapped its head toward me. That energy again. Tighter now, less curiosity, more agitation. I kept my voice level. You don't get it every time. I don't know why I framed it like that, like I was setting rules, like there was an agreement in place. But once you start thinking in those terms, it's hard to stop. The larger one stepped forward, closer to the fence than it had been the night before. Not crossing, not testing, just reducing the distance. The smaller one followed, but its movements were less controlled now, more abrupt. It came right up to the wire, pressing in close, nose pushing between the gaps, trying to pull scent from the ground inside. I felt my body tense. Back, I said, sharper this time. The word carried, cut through the quiet. The larger one moved immediately, not toward me, toward the smaller one. It stepped between it and the fence, blocking it. Same positioning as the night before. Clear, controlled. The smaller one let out a short, sharp sound and pulled back a step. Not far, but enough. That dynamic held. Leader and follower. The larger one didn't look at me right away. It kept its focus on the smaller one for a second longer, holding that position. Then it turned, slow, deliberate, and looked at me again. I felt it settle, that connection, that recognition. You understand, I said under my breath. Another lie, cleaner than the last. Because it felt earned, but still wrong. The smaller one circled once more, wider this time, then came to a stop a few feet back. Energy still there, still restless, but contained. For now. We stayed like that for a while. No movement, no sound, just that pressure building again. Different this time. Not curiosity, not testing, something heavier. Expectation without reward. I broke it. Tomorrow, I said quietly, we'll try something else. The larger one's head tilted again, that same motion, but slower, measured. Then it did something new. It stepped forward again, closer, not to the fence, into the clearing, reducing the gap between us beyond what it had done before. I felt my grip tighten on the edge of the window frame. If you come any closer, I said, steady but firm, this ends. Line, clear, defined, always. It stopped. Right at that boundary, held it, didn't test, didn't retreat, just stayed. The smaller one mirrored the movement, stopping behind it, body angled slightly, watching both of us. Waiting. We held that position for a long time. Long enough that the tension stopped feeling sharp and started feeling stable, like something that could exist there, between us. That was the real shift. Not the food, not the approach. That. The idea that this could become normal. The larger one lowered its head slightly, then stepped back, breaking the line. The smaller one followed immediately. No hesitation, no lingering. They moved toward the tree line, same as always, same direction, gone. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. That's right, I muttered. That's how it works. Even as I said it, I knew I was building something that didn't exist, a structure out of responses, a system out of behavior. I closed the window and stepped back into the room. The silence felt different now. Heavier, not empty, occupied, like something had been there and left an imprint behind. I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, because I was thinking, running through what I'd seen, what had changed, what hadn't. They adapted. Every time. Faster than they should have. Cleaner than instinct alone could explain. That left me with one conclusion. They weren't just reacting, they were learning. And so was I. That's the part I didn't question hard enough. Learning goes both ways, and it doesn't stay balanced for long. By morning, I had already decided on the next step. Not more food, not yet. Distance, adjustment. I needed to see what they'd do if I changed the space instead of the offering. I walked out to the fence again. Same tracks, same approach, same withdrawal. But there was something new. Closer to the wire, closer than before. The impressions where they'd stood were deeper. More time spent in one place. Less hesitation. I crouched there, studying it. "You're getting comfortable," I said. Then I looked up at the cabin, at the distance between where I stood and where I'd been standing in the doorway the night before. "You're not supposed to do that," I added quietly. "Comfort changes behavior, removes caution, pushes boundaries." I stood up and walked the perimeter. Every section, every post, every stretch of wire. Nothing else disturbed. No other entry points tested. Just that one spot. Always that one spot. Consistency like that doesn't fade. It builds. I went back inside and sat at the table again. Same place. Same position. Only this time, the room felt smaller. Like the space outside had started pressing in. "They're going to come closer," I said, not a guess. A conclusion. And when they do, I didn't finish the thought. Didn't need to. Because I already knew what I was going to do when it happened. That was the problem. Not that they were adapting, that I was ready to meet them halfway. I didn't move the fence. I moved myself. That was the next variable. Not distance from them to the barrier, but distance from me to them. You can learn a lot by changing positions. Not just what something does, but what it expects you to do. That evening, I didn't take the window, didn't stand in the doorway either. I went out early, just before the light fell off the trees, and I set a chair 10 feet back from the fence at that same spot they kept coming to. Sat it there plain as day. No cover, no obstruction, just a man and a line. I left it empty. Let it sit there through dusk. Let it become part of the scene. Then I went back inside and waited for the hour. No food, no bait, just presence. 3 a.m. came quiet, no wind, no movement in the branches. The kind of still that makes every small sound carry farther than it should. I stepped out before they arrived. Door open. Boots on the packed dirt. Rifle leaning against the cabin wall behind me, not in reach unless I turned my back to the fence to get it. That was a choice. A bad one, if you measure it by sense. A deliberate one, if you measure it by outcome. I walked to the chair and sat down, hands on my thighs, back straight, eyes on the tree line. "If you're coming," I said under my breath, "come." The words felt different outside. Less like a test, more like an invitation. I didn't like that, but I didn't take it back. Time stretched. Long enough that doubt started to creep in. Maybe they wouldn't come. Maybe I'd broken the pattern too much. Maybe movement. Left side of the tree line. Low, fast, the smaller one. It came in first like it always did, but there was hesitation this time. It slowed as it crossed into the clearing, head lifting, scanning. Not just the fence now, but the space. Me, the chair. The fact that I wasn't behind a barrier. It stopped short of the wire, didn't approach, didn't search, just watched. The larger one came in after, not rushing, not late, timed. It stepped into the clearing and went upright before it reached the fence, same as every night before. But this time, it didn't go to the wire. It stopped several feet back, further than it ever had. That told me something right away. It was adjusting for me, accounting for the change. We stayed like that for a moment. No one moving, no one closing distance. The air between us felt heavier out here, closer, more real. "You don't like that," I said, nodding once toward the fence. "Not tonight." The smaller one shifted, pacing in a short arc, but it didn't go to the wire, didn't test it, didn't even look at the spot where the food had been before. Its focus was split, between me and the larger one. The larger one kept its eyes on me, direct, steady, not aggressive, but not passive either, aware, calculating. That's the word I settled on. I leaned back slightly in the chair, just enough to show I wasn't tensing forward. "You want closer," I said. "So do I." There it was, out in the open. Not a thought anymore, a statement. The smaller one made that sound again, short, tight, higher than before. The larger one didn't react to the sound, didn't correct it. It stepped forward, one pace, into the space between where it had stopped and the fence. I felt my chest tighten. "If you come past that line," I said, voice steady, "this ends. Rule. Clear. Defined always." It stopped. Held it. Head tilted slightly. That motion again, but there was something else in it now. Recognition of the line, of the boundary I'd just set. The smaller one edged forward too, but not as far. It stayed behind the larger one, using it as cover, its movements tighter, quicker. We held that distance, closer than any night before, farther from safety than I'd ever been with them. I could hear it now, their breathing, not loud, but present, wet, measured, in rhythm, not labored, controlled. I didn't like that either. "All right," I said quietly, "that's far enough." The larger one didn't move, didn't retreat, just stayed where it was, holding the space, holding me in it. Then, slowly, it lowered itself to all fours. That shift always did something to me. Seeing it move between those states, too smooth, too natural. It took another step forward, not toward the fence, toward me, closing the gap. I felt my hands tighten on my legs. "Stop," I said, not louder, but firmer. The word carried. The larger one froze mid-step, head lifting slightly, eyes locked on mine. We held that. A moment stretched thin. Then it set its foot down, but not forward. Back, retreating that half step it had just taken. Not fully, just enough to return to the line I'd set. The smaller one made a sharp sound, quicker, almost like a protest, and shifted, but it didn't break past the larger one. That confirmed it. Clear as anything. The larger one wasn't just leading, it was enforcing. On both sides. I let out a slow breath. "Good," I said. The word felt wrong the second it left my mouth, like I was praising something I didn't understand, but I didn't take it back. We stayed like that a while longer. No food, no movement, just distance and control. Or what I believed was control. Then the larger one did something it hadn't done before. It turned its head slightly. Not away, past me, toward the cabin, toward the dark behind it. It held that angle for a second, listening. Then it looked back at me. That small shift changed something. Subtle, but enough. "Yeah," I said quietly, "there's nothing for you there." Another statement I couldn't back up. Another line I assumed meant something. The smaller one followed that glance, looking past me for a second, then back to the larger one. Energy shifted again. Not toward the fence, not toward me, toward awareness of more than just this clearing. That's when I felt it. Not a sound, not movement. Just that same pressure I'd noticed nights before. But wider, not focused on me alone, on the space, on the area beyond. Like something else could be out there. Watching. I didn't turn, didn't look back. If there was something, I wasn't going to show it, I knew. If there's more of you, I said, keeping my voice even, they stay out there. The words were for me as much as them. Drawing a boundary I couldn't enforce. The larger one held my gaze. Long enough that the moment stretched again. Then it lowered its head, turned, dropped fully to all fours, and stepped back, breaking the line. The smaller one followed immediately. No hesitation, no lingering. Both of them moved toward the tree line. Same direction, same path, gone. I stayed in the chair, didn't move right away, let the space settle, let the quiet come back. It felt different out there now. Not empty. Occupied, like the clearing itself remembered what had just happened. I stood up slowly, walked back to the cabin. Didn't rush, didn't look over my shoulder. Inside, I closed the door and leaned against it for a second. That was too close, I said. Not as a warning, as a realization. Because it hadn't felt like a loss of control. It had felt like a negotiation. And that's worse. I sat at the table and stared at nothing for a long time, running it back, every movement, every response. They adapted to me being outside, adjusted distance, respected the line, but tested it. Once, that step forward. That wasn't random, that was a probe, and it stopped when I told it to. That's the part that stayed with me. Not that it came closer, that it listened. By morning, I had a new problem. Not what they would do next, what I would. Because once you establish a boundary like that, the only way forward is to see how far it holds. And I already knew I wasn't going to stop there. I should have pulled back after that night. Anyone with sense would have. You establish a boundary. You see it respected. You leave it alone. That's how you keep things from escalating. That's how you keep something unknown from becoming something you can't manage. I knew that. I didn't do it. The next evening, I moved the chair closer. Not a lot. Maybe 3 feet. But enough that the space between me and the fence didn't feel like a buffer anymore. It felt like a meeting point. I noticed it the second I sat down. "You're pushing it," I muttered, not to them, to myself, but I didn't move the chair back. 3 o'clock came, then 3:02, they were later. That alone tightened something in my chest. Pattern shift. The smaller one came in first again, but slower than the night before. It didn't rush the clearing. It eased into it, head low, scanning, taking in the change. Me, closer. The chair, the distance. It stopped further back than it had before. Didn't approach the fence, didn't circle, just watched. The larger one followed. Same upright posture, same controlled movement, but it didn't go to the fence either. It stopped where the smaller one had, matching its distance. That was new. They weren't just reacting to me now, they were recalibrating together. "You noticed," I said quietly. The larger one's head tilted, slow and deliberate. Recognition again, but different this time, not just of me, of the change. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms on my knees. "Come on," I said. "This is where we were last night. That wasn't true." And we both knew it. The larger one didn't move right away. It held position, watching me, like it was waiting for something more. Permission. Or proof. The smaller one shifted. A quick, tight movement, then let out a short sound, sharper than before, almost impatient. That energy had been building. Now it had direction. The larger one stepped forward, one pace, then another. Not toward the fence, toward me, closing the gap faster than it had the night before. My body reacted before my mind caught up. Muscles tightened, breath shortened, hands gripping my knees. "Stop," I said, firm, clear. The word landed. The larger one froze mid-step, held it, eyes locked on mine. We stayed like that for a second that felt longer than it was. Then it stepped back. One pace, returning to the distance it had chosen at the start. The smaller one made a sharp sound, more frustrated this time, and shifted behind it. Didn't push forward, didn't break the line. That told me everything. The rule still held, but just barely. "You're learning," I said under my breath. Then I caught it. So was I. That's what made it dangerous. Because I wasn't just watching anymore, I was adjusting, pushing, seeing how far I could take it. The larger one lowered itself to all fours, then back up again in one smooth motion, like it was testing its own movement, or showing it. I didn't like that thought. Not at all. We held that distance for another minute. No food, no fence, just space. Shared. Then the larger one turned. No hesitation, no slow retreat, just a decision made. The smaller one followed immediately. They disappeared into the tree line without looking back. I sat there a while after they were gone, long enough for the cold to settle into my hands. "That was a warning," I said, "not from them, from the situation." And for the first time since this started, I almost listened. I didn't sit outside the next night. That decision came easier than the others. Not because I was backing away, because I was watching for what happened when I stopped pushing. There's a difference. I left the chair where it was, closer than it should have been, and went back to the window instead. Same position as before, same angle, no adjustments. I wanted the frame back between us. Something solid, something predictable. 3:01 a.m. They came in on time. That part hadn't changed. The smaller one entered first, but it didn't move the same way anymore. No quick circling, no tight scanning of the ground. It stepped into the clearing and stopped almost immediately, head angled slightly upward. Looking, not searching. The larger one followed, slower than usual, and didn't rise fully upright at first. It stayed low, moving in parallel with the fence instead of going straight to the usual point. That was new. They were breaking their own pattern. "All right," I said under my breath. "So that's where we are now." The smaller one shifted, then let out that same thin sound but shorter. Controlled. Almost deliberate, like it was signaling. The larger one responded immediately, not with movement toward the fence, with a glance. Back toward the tree line, then toward me, then back again. I felt something tighten in my chest. Coordination, not instinct, coordination. The larger one stepped forward one pace, then stopped, held, not testing distance this time. Measuring it, measuring me. The smaller one mirrored it but stayed behind, offset slightly, watching the same points from a different angle. That detail mattered. They weren't reacting separately anymore. They were dividing perception. I shifted slightly at the window. The larger one's head snapped toward the movement instantly. Immediate. Precise. "You see everything now," I said quietly. It didn't move. Just held that position. The smaller one edged closer to the fence but didn't touch it, didn't dig, didn't test. It just stood there, focused on the base of the wire like it was remembering something, not discovering it. That was worse. Memory implies repetition. I leaned closer to the glass without thinking. The larger one reacted again, one step forward, then stopped. No rule spoken this time, no boundary drawn. It already knew where it was. I realized then I hadn't been setting limits. I'd been defining a shared space, and it was using it. "Don't do that," I said, though I wasn't sure who I was speaking to anymore. The smaller one made a short movement, quick, tight, and the larger one turned its head slightly toward it. A pause. Then the larger one stepped back. Not fully, just enough to re-establish distance, controlled. The smaller one followed the adjustment without resistance. That confirmed it again. Hierarchy, stable, functional. I didn't like how easy that was becoming to read. We stayed like that for a while. No crossing, no digging, just observation. Then the larger one turned away first. Clean break. The smaller one followed instantly. No hesitation, no lingering. They left the clearing together. Same direction, same pace. I didn't move from the window right away. I kept watching even after the trees swallowed them, because the important part wasn't what they did when they arrived. It was what they did after. And this time, they left synchronized. That's when I said it out loud. They're not coming to the fence anymore. I paused, then corrected myself. They're coming to me. I didn't go outside at all that night, not the chair, not the fence, nothing. I stayed inside the cabin with the light off and the rifle on the table, just listening. After a while, you start to realize how much of the night you were never actually hearing before. The woods don't get quieter. You just learn what to ignore. 3 o'clock came and went without anything moving in the clearing. That should have felt like relief. It didn't. It felt like an absence that had been arranged. At 3:07, I finally saw movement on the north camera feed. I pulled it up without turning the main light on. The smaller one appeared first, but it didn't enter like before. It stood at the edge of the frame, partially obscured by trees, head angled toward the camera itself. Not the fence, the camera. The larger one came into view seconds later, same position it always took. But it didn't move forward. It waited. Both of them stayed at the edge of the perimeter, just beyond where they normally committed. That alone changed everything. They weren't entering the pattern. They were observing it from outside. The smaller one made that sound again, but softer, almost contained, then stopped completely. The larger one shifted its head slightly, and I watched it turn just enough that I knew it wasn't looking at the fence anymore. It was looking at the structure, the system, the cameras. "You figured it out," I said under my breath. It wasn't admiration, it was recognition. The larger one stepped forward one pace, stopped, then turned slightly toward the tree line again, like it was checking something beyond my view. Something I hadn't accounted for. The smaller one followed immediately when it moved. No delay, no separation. I leaned closer to the screen without thinking. The larger one's head snapped toward the cabin direction again. Direct, focused, through distance, through glass, through night. That pressure came back immediately. Except this time, it wasn't centered on the fence. It was centered on me. I sat back slowly. "This isn't the fence anymore," I said. The realization settled heavier than the silence around it. On the feed, both of them turned at the same time. Not retreating, not advancing, just aligning. Then they stepped back into the trees together. No rush, no break in synchronization. Gone. I kept watching the empty frame longer than I should have, because now I understood what the pattern really was. It was never about getting in, it was about knowing where I was. I am 67 years old now, and I'm writing this with the same rifle on the table beside me, though I haven't fired it in years. They never came through the fence. Not in the way I first thought they would. That was the mistake I made at the start, thinking the boundary was physical. It wasn't. It was attention. Once I understood that, everything after became easier to see and harder to live with. They stopped digging after that final night on the cameras. No more testing the base of the gate, no more circling the wire. The fence became irrelevant the moment they stopped treating it like an obstacle. Instead, they started arriving at the edge of my perception. Always just far enough into the tree line that I could see them, but never close enough to be forced into action. The smaller one still moved more, still restless, still searching in short, broken patterns that made no sense until you realized it wasn't searching at all anymore. It was waiting for me to react. The larger one never broke stance after that. It just watched, not the fence, not the traps. Me. And I started changing things without meaning to. Where I stood, when I turned the light on, how long I stayed at the window. Small adjustments I told myself were for observation. They weren't. They were responses. That's how it happened. Slow enough that you don't notice the transfer of control until it's already complete. There was no final breach. No moment where something forced its way in. Just a gradual realization that I was no longer setting the conditions. I was operating inside them. One night, I stopped checking the cameras. The next, I didn't go outside at all. After that, I moved the chair away from the fence permanently. Not because I was afraid, because it no longer mattered where I placed it. They already knew where I would be. That's the part I need you to understand if you take anything from this. It was never about the gate. It was about recognition. And when something like that recognizes you back distance, stops being protection. I don't see them every night anymore. Only when I'm still long enough to notice the edge of the tree line is a little too deliberate in its shape. If you're hearing this and thinking it's just another story about something in the woods, don't build lines you think you control. They don't need to cross them to own the space. Sometimes all they have to do is learn where you stand and wait until you stop moving.